Well, hi everyone and welcome. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar. I'm Cameron Coffey, your behind the scenes host, and we recently presented this session at Adobe Summit last week, and so we're excited to bring it to you live today. This is a great opportunity to dive into the discussion, ask questions, and explore how Colgate-Palmolive has scaled their data strategy globally. Today, I have Mark Zomik, Media Analytics Lead at Colgate-Palmolive, and EJ Freni, Claravine's Chief Revenue Officer, presenting Scaling Success with Data Standards. This is Colgate-Palmolive's path to global data consistency. We'll be sending out the recording afterwards, and it will be available on our website if you'd like to revisit or share it. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box to the right. And stick around till the end. We've set aside time to go through those Q&A, so drop those questions there. Now, let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to bring to the stage EJ and Mark.
Great. Thanks so much, Cam. So as Cam said, Mark and I had the pleasure of presenting this at Adobe Summit last Wednesday, and we could not have asked for a better lead-in than that morning during the keynote. I had to give a shout out to Hillary Cook, who's the VP and Global Head of Marketing Orchestration and Operations at Marriott International. She got up in front of the entire summit during the keynote and talked about personalization, customer journey, but she also sprinkled throughout was talking about data standards. And at the end of her conversation, she said, taxonomy is sexy. So hopefully you all feel the same way when we leave this conversation. You all take some tidbits out. But Mark and I are going to tell you a little bit about the importance of data standards. I'm going to set the stage by talking about the challenges that we see across the marketing landscape. And then Mark is going to walk you through how Colgate has actually instituted data standards in practice and scaled this globally. So to set the stage, today's enterprises, you're all dealing with a big data challenge. You have various teams across different organizations with different data needs. There are many silos that can be created, both at the local, global, and regional level. But the average enterprise organization has anywhere from 90 to 120 different SaaS applications just in their marketing technology stack. So you can start to see and play out the amount of chaos that this can create if you don't have a data strategy and data standards in place. And again, that's just if you have one centralized team, but we know many of you on the call, certainly the folks that we talked to at Adobe Summit, and many of the folks that we talked to in general, that's not the case. You have to figure out your data strategy and your data standards from a global perspective, a regional perspective, and a local perspective, with many times constituents across these teams using different technology applications, having different needs and different nuances. And Mark is going to go into how they solved this at Colgate in a second. But you can start to play this out and see, and many of you are probably experiencing this in practice, that misalignment and errors in data can create problems for everybody. Simple things like, did the right creative get trafficked and go live? Or 6 weeks into a campaign, you realize something was either tagged incorrectly or named incorrectly, so it's going to have a massive issue in reporting. Or the analytics team gets a report post-campaign and realizes, oh my gosh, everything upstream was implemented incorrectly, and now we've got to go back and figure out where this is. So data standards play a massive, massive part in trying to bring order to all this chaos. Now, that's the internal things that you have to deal with on a daily basis. Externally, there are market dynamics that are constantly changing, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about all the things that we've been dealing with over the last 10 years or so, but there are privacy regulations, GDPR, CCPA. Depending on what type of market you are and what vertical you are in, you might have different privacy, stringent privacy permutations that you have to adhere to. You've got the pending death and resurrection of the cookie, but regardless, you have signal loss on mobile and other areas. We won't go too deep into the fact that during the pandemic, we all had to live through a massive evolution in digital transformation. The average marketer had to transform 5 years ahead of where they were to meet the ever-changing needs of the consumer. And then we're always changing up we talk about fragmentation with technology internally at marketing organizations, but also there's fragmentation on the channels and the means by which you can reach your audience. 5 years ago, TikTok was not a major place that people were spending money or consumers were spending time. CTV, retail media networks, it's constant change that you have to deal with. But really, the most disruptive and exciting change that's happened over the last couple of years is that ChatGPT moment back in 2022. I'd venture to guess that everybody that's watching this webinar today was in some way, shape, or form dabbling in AI and ML But 2022, 2023 was a transformational time for us where everything accelerated. Every human being on the planet now had access to AI tools and could start to play around with this, which is incredible. The challenge is going to be, though, 90% of the world's data was generated in the last 2 years, and the volume of data being created is going to double every 4 years. Again, incredibly exciting, probably the most exciting thing of our generation and our lifetime, but you need to have a practice and a strategy in place to measure all of this output of AI. Gen AI is incredibly exciting. The idea of personalizing on the individual basis and having millions of assets and pieces of content is exciting, but you have to have data standards and a data practice in place to make sure you can measure that. So you've heard me say the word data standards quite a bit already. What are they? What are data standards? Think of data standards as your common data language across your organization. Data standards can be associated with capabilities like link structure, naming conventions, your taxonomy. So taxonomy is a big component of this. Tagging of campaigns and content, data governance practices. Just as important of those capabilities that you see on the right-hand side of the screen here is the metadata, the context about the data that you capture and about those standards. So the experiences, creative, product, the context around those data. One of those data points. One of the best examples I always give is you can have a massive database of 7-digit fields, or fields with 7 digits in them, thousands and thousands. Now, unless you have the context that those are phone numbers or a specific ID, those could be just random numbers in a spreadsheet. So metadata is incredibly important when you think of data standards because it gives you the context. The other important thing about having a data standards practice and strategy in place is if you're using a campaign ID, which many of you are, or a content ID, a unique content identifier. If you have standards in place and the metadata, you can start to append that to that ID and extract a treasure trove of data like no else. So what's an example? We used this last week because most of the folks in the room at Adobe Summit, they had taken a flight out to get to Vegas. I'm sure everybody in this call at some point has traveled this year or has traveled in the last 12 months. And if you have, airlines have this concept of a passenger number record, a PNR. That is an ID. The beauty of this is behind the scenes, the airlines have data standards in place. So through that one number, you can figure out a gate number, security status, your dietary preferences, the seat number, even the pilot's name and date of birth. All of this data that the airlines can use to personalize their journey, effectively moving hundreds of thousands of people through the sky daily. So just as important as that, having that identifier, it's having the standards in place behind the scenes to capture all of that other data and all of that other metadata to append to that record locator or ID. Again, the same could hold true in marketing practices with a campaign or a content ID. So before I hand it over to Mark, just 2 quick things. Data requires collaboration and connection. Back to some of the chaos that I mentioned in the first slide. You've got different constituents in the organization that are focused on different things, maybe strategy, customer experience, media, analytics, and data science. You have individuals that have different data needs, but also might control different nuances of the data, and they're all operating oftentimes in different systems. Data standards facilitate collaboration and connections across all of these different business cases, use cases, teams, and technologies. And as I hand it over to Mark, he's going to walk you through how Colgate-Palmolive has done this at global scale.
Thanks, EJ. I don't know if this is more or less fun than the version at Las Vegas, but I guess we get to spend, I get to spend the night in my own bed. So there's that. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I want to start by defining some terms that I think are important to define. Data standards, obviously, across so many parts of our lives, as EJ mentioned. Taxonomy, the way we use it in media activations and creative naming, et cetera, is essentially a hack. It says, I'm using a million different systems. How do I make sure that all these individual systems can speak to each other, or not even to each other, but we can coalesce that data and use that data and intermingle it in a consistent and thoughtful way? And so we do that using taxonomy, taking a string of metadata fields that all get put together. We pre-agree on what they're going to be. But the one thing that these systems have in common essentially is a title field or a naming field. And we hack the systems essentially by saying we're going to agree on how we're going to name it. That's the evolution of naming as it, and we all use it. I mean, we have files on our computer. Each one of us has our own individual consistent naming strategy. But what we try to accomplish here is get everybody get on the same naming strategy. So again, taxonomy is a hack. Think about it that way, because sometimes that'll help you understand in certain instances how it's going to be implemented. And the next thing I wanted to just mention is I do think that we are, I don't want to say we were successful because this is an ongoing journey. We are finding success in our balancing the evolutionary nature of what we're doing against the revolutionary nature of what we're doing. Change is hard. Implementing a change, we'll talk about what that change means in a little while, but change is hard. And the less we change all at once, the more ability we're going to have to, or more success we're going to have in having people absorb that change. And I do think that it was an apt, way we were discussing the revolution versus the evolution, not just because it was a cute play on words, or though it did help, but the revolution in terms of what we're able to report based on the evolution of aligning everybody to a single taxonomy really was a great metaphor for people to understand what are listed here as, really super obvious benefits or challenges that we had, and the benefit of moving into a direction where you have better standards. The other thing I wanted to define was global consolidated automated reporting. It seems like it's a simple name, but the truth is there really aren't people doing this at scale. Or let's just say we at Colgate are proud that we're very much, getting to the forefront of being successful in this area. The way we define automated reporting is from the moment the practitioner's hands leave the keyboard to execute the buy until that buy posts in any kind of dashboard, reporting dashboard. There is no need for user intervention. It almost sounds like an overly simplistic definition, but as any practitioner knows, the facts on the ground are not that. Right? Today, the overwhelming majority, I don't even want to say 90+%, but of reporting has the practitioner themselves, the person who executed the activity, weighing in on the data or pulling the data themselves together in order to generate that reporting. Meaning that I can't do anything until the buyer who made the buy graded their own homework and made whatever changes they wanted to before they handed that homework in. And that's challenging. That's not automated reporting. Downloading something from a UI and running a couple macros is not what automated reporting is in any way. And the only way to get to truly automated reporting is to be at a point where that taxonomy is pristine enough that I can generate all of the knowledge I have based on the metadata included in that taxonomy. That's really, really a big change, because it's not only changing people's habits about the taxonomy that they're going to use, it's really the extra time it takes to get it right at the beginning. I used to joke all the time that I would spend 8 months so I could answer any question in 8 minutes. But that requires enough lead time at the beginning to understand what I want to report at the end versus what I'm going to put in at the beginning. And that sort of gets us to the next slide, right? And this is the media process at a really high and somewhat simplistic level, but it starts out with, what does my year look like? What do my targets look like? This is a generic picture of a purchase funnel. You can use a McKinsey loop. We have, every brand has their own sort of process, but a really good media agency, and we partner with them all over the world. Our largest partner is WPP, and they're super buttoned up. And we have, and we have processes in place, but a really good media agency is naturally going to enter a media activity 5 times between the idea and the time that media reaches a customer, a minimum of 5 times. Meaning I'm going to make it might be a PowerPoint presentation, it might be a calendar, it might be any other modality of my brand plan, right? Then I'm going to have a flow chart. I'm going to have a Gantt chart. We call them flow charts, where it shows my activity by channel over time. Then I'm probably going to need some kind of authorization to spend that money, which is not just somebody initialing a flow chart. Those things are usually flipped around by vendor, by time. Maybe we're going to do them quarterly, whatever it is. And I've just entered in a different modality. I've entered my media plan now a 3rd time. Now I have to put it into a bill pay system, right? I'm going to need in the US, Prisma, certainly Donovan is the most popular of the systems, Prisma for digital, Spectra for TV. But either way, I'm going to most likely in any country have different systems for TV and radio and print. And that's going to do my bill pay, my buy management. And then I'm probably going to now enter it into a traffic system. And again, in the US, it's a little bit more streamlined, or those Prisma users in some markets who can kick it over to Campaign Manager if that's what you're using. But again, most people are now entering the buy and the buy instructions and the campaign names again into some kind of ad ops platform, whether it's an answer, whether it's Meta, or whether it's Campaign Manager, or whatever you're using. So again, a really good agency by definition is going to enter a media plan 5 times between the idea and the execution. That is like, I don't want to say that's an accident waiting to happen. That's like 100 accidents waiting to happen. We literally have, hundreds of people put hands on keyboard to execute our media on an annual basis. So the fact is that you need to have an organized systems. You need to know how these systems interact with each other, or most likely don't interact with each other, right? So then you can understand what needs to be put where. And ultimately, all of the pieces of this, whether it's a campaign and a placement and a creative and an audience, all of these pieces converge on the delivery of an impression, essentially in digital, to somebody's screen. So I don't need them all, and they're all coming from different places. I will likely have my audience served from one platform that goes to a different platform to get my creative, right? And all of that convergence happens at the point of the impression being delivered. And I might have a verification tool delivered at the same time, like Double Verify. So all of these things are converging. And again, understanding the process in total and who needs a seat at that table, right? I think that we at our peril exclude our analytics teams from the taxonomy process, right? Because they have to know what you're ultimately reporting. So that loop comes back. Going to want them at the table to say, these are the things that I need to know later, so that you better put them in earlier. Most likely, that's going to force your taxonomy to be a little bit more granular than you might have thought about it from a media perspective. But always, it's easier to roll up than it is to roll down. It's impossible if I put my taxonomy on week of the year and then ultimately I wanted to roll down to day, right? I can't do that. If I put my taxonomy at day, then I can always roll up to week, as a simple example. So again, knowing what the analytics is, right, as it comes around the bottom and comes back around the other side, knowing about what that analytics need is important to be able to drive that taxonomy. Okay, next. And ultimately, another way of viewing it is to figure out what's that whole connected view of the ecosystem, right? Again, my purchase funnel here is in the middle. My idea of my audiences, what I might call them personas evolved that I'm targeting in a campaign, right? But ultimately, I have a click event, let's say downstream on Facebook or whatever it is, or in any way, or even in a regular GRP on TV. I have an event where a customer is viewing an ad, and I need to be able to say, well, this is part of my my new moms audience. I created a new moms audience because that was my target for my brand. But you don't buy a new mom's audience at, NBC or a network, or even, at a website. Essentially, you're buying characteristics that you define as new moms, right? And understanding how the audience connects from the beginning of the audience idea, bringing in MRI, bringing in characteristics, bringing in all of those other rich details you're going to do to ultimately create the audience you might deliver on YouTube, right? Which is could be based on affinity groups. How does that all ladder up? And that really is the challenge that you have, but that the naming can help solve in terms of how you end up saying, oh, all these audiences are part of this audience. All of these little granular delivery details of an affinity group, let's say, ladder into this audience. And if done properly, you then can see, well, I might be overusing some of these affinity groups on YouTube. I have a large portfolio of brands, and I might be overusing certain affinity groups and bidding against myself, for all we know. If you have the right taxonomy and the right process, you'll be able to discover that. So part of the first part of this was to try to eliminate the disconnects. As if you remember from the slide before, everything looks like it's a nice flow, but it's not. It stops and starts and stops and starts. There aren't real handoffs. So we've utilized taxonomy to eliminate the disconnects. Now, how do we do that? So first of all, and it turns out people may think this is one of the harder things to get everybody to buy into, but I think for us, it might have been one of the easier things to get to buy into, was to view all of the values we were using in a pre-agreed upon taxonomy and establish ownership for each of those values. And it was very non-controversial, meaning that finance, everybody has a finance team, right? The finance department decides these countries are part of these regions. And someone on a product team decides these sub-brands are part of this master brand and are part of this category. That's all been established way before anybody thought about advertising, right? I don't get to decide that Colgate whitening is a home care product that falls under skincare category. It doesn't, right? That's already pre-decided. And so what we did was, rather than having media teams, essentially, because they're the ones doing the execution, write out all the lists and decide all the values, we went back and took, these are the list of markets from finance. This is a list of agencies from finance. Here's a list of all of our brands and all of our franchises and all of our products that were pre-established before we got here. And to the point of, if somebody wants to add a product to the list, I have a media plan, I have a new product. 1 second, I want to see a picture of that product. I want to make sure that product is on that list. I want to make sure we're conforming to the hierarchy that was built out. And again, this was, I thought this was going to be the hardest part of it. It turns out to be one of the least controversial parts of it, because everybody can acknowledge the fact that if finance decides that Canada is own country and not the 51st state, then I don't get to say that Canada is part of the United States. Nobody does. Up until somebody changes that, the way it is in the system is the way it is in the system. In fact, we had a request for a new product from our team in Latin America, and the product was called ETB. So as usual, I wanted to see the product. So they send me a screenshot of the product, and ETB turns out that it was electric toothbrushes. And I go, okay, 1 second. We already have a category, not invented by me, invented by the hierarchy of what we call the One Colgate product hierarchy, that said powered toothbrushes is the category. So I replied back to the team, well, we have powered toothbrushes, to which the reply was, well, they call them ETB here. And I said, yes, but in the system, there are powered toothbrushes. And ultimately, that was accepted as an answer, because there is a Colgate way, and each of our companies has ways that they name stuff, and you just have to figure out who owns that data, and that becomes the unifying piece of the puzzle. Campaign names are the same way. That was also maybe a little bit more controversial. If I'm running a back to school campaign, right, the planning team gets to decide we're running a back to school campaign, but it's a campaign and maybe not an initiative. And this is how we're going to spell it. This is how we're going to write it. This is how we're going to abbreviate it. those decisions are made upstream. So there's no free form left for the buyer to deviate. They're using a pull down list. So we use taxonomy to eliminate the disconnects by understanding the ownership of the process. We then published that data dictionary and gave everybody access to it. So if there is a market selection I have to make in an audience, and a market selection that I have to make in a campaign, and a market selection I have to make in creative, that's one list, right? And Claravine makes all of that super easy. All of those hierarchical lists and the dependent lists are super clear and super easy, and there's one set of books for everybody. And if not only if I have campaigns and audiences, great. If I'm running CRM, if I'm whatever it is, whatever you're running, if there is a list and that list has overlap somewhere else, you have to use the same customized connected data dictionary. And then this is not a set it and forget it kind of thing. You have to be on top of this all the time, understanding how all the values get filled, understanding. And again, Claravine has a number of powerful tools to create what's called powered lists, where you can build on lists in real time from one team to another. Like I can have 7 or 8 fields in an audience taxonomy that rolls up to a shorter audience name that ultimately is what gets executed, but it's all connected downstream. And it has to be watched all the time. Again, this is my first slide, right? This is a hack. You have to understand that people try to hack the hack. So understanding that this has to be monitored all the time. And again, one of the more powerful tools that Claravine has rolled out recently is an integration with CM and an integration with Meta and an integration with DV360. So not only am I looking at the standards as created in Claravine, which they're by very nature going to be compliant, right? But I can actually see what the buyer put in for CM and does it match? Is it compliant? Not only that, I can correct it in Claravine when I'm looking at it. So ultimately, those standards are managed over time. And understand where you can be flexible and where you can't be flexible, making those priorities. You'll never succeed if you try to do it all at once. You have to go step by step. Like, again, it's evolution if you want to succeed. But understanding, getting that whole everybody into Claravine, no matter what their formats are, with sort of the wax on, wax off approach. So the muscle memory is there. This is where I get my names. That's not flexible, right? Saying that I get to decide that now ETB is the new category of power toothbrushes, that's not flexible, and that's not somewhere where I'm going to be flexible. Giving somebody another concatenation because they need certain other fields that they think that they need to see downstream because they don't know where the lookup table is. Okay, I can be flexible there, right? Giving them a freeform field to add stuff, we could be flexible there. Where you put it into the platform, we could be flexible there. There are a lot of places to be flexible to work within the system to make as impactful changes as possible. But then again, to know where you where you can give in and know where you have to hold firm. The change was, immeasurable, really. It's becoming that way, to be honest. We over the past 2 years, we've had an incredible journey, and the things that we know now, I don't know that we would have had the hope 2 years ago to think that we could know. Having over a full year of data, being able to refine our data practices not only over time, but again in an annual way to relook at everything to say, no, now we did this for a year and a half. Now we're going to make this change because it's going to benefit everybody. And you're going to want to try to figure out a way so all your systems can live in harmony. And we're really use Claravine to break down a lot of the silos between the audience team and the brand planning team and the tactical media team and the finance team. All of these systems then can work together in a much more cohesive way through the use of the taxonomy that we've built out in the application. And again, I want to say near immediate results. There were a lot of things we were able to quickly discover about the way we were utilizing audiences and data types, the way we were utilizing vendors, what it looked like in, which markets were adhering to the standards and which weren't. There were a lot of things that we were able to utilize. And as we rolled out our changes this year, we really built a robust system that allows us to change retroactively, update retroactively, and fix data and enhance data as it comes in, even after the fact, through the, the way we've integrated all the systems. So again, I think that it was a super agile approach to using, to pushing Claravine to, in a number of cases, places they didn't realize they needed to go. But using taxonomy as the connective tissue from the beginning of the process to the end of the process, understanding those data owners, and enabling the teams to communicate through taxonomy and have the reporting be as accurate as possible at the end of the process. I think that's back to EJ.
Yep, great, Mark. So before we wrap up with some key takeaways and Q&A, I also wanted to touch on some more progressive ideas. And Mark certainly talked about content, but just to tether this back to some of the things I talked about at the front end of the conversation, and certainly what we heard at Adobe Summit last week, a lot about the content supply chain, generative AI, the explosion of content. The more you can control at the beginning of that supply chain around your content data and your content data standards, and specifically your content metadata, the better you're going to be throughout that content supply chain. And then the better you're going to have fuel to fuel AI. So we believe there's a massive opportunity to implement data standards for content and capture as much metadata as possible up front at the point of creation and in your DAM and your CMS, so you can have better findability. Downstream, you can actually track what worked or what permutations or what atomic elements of an ad actually worked well. Content metadata can help you connect and build connections between content in every single step in the supply chain, and also give you some version control and history if needed. Adobe also talked about content analytics, a new solution that they're rolling out. As you start to do better analysis on content and leverage systems to do content analytics, it's only going to be as good as the data standards that you have in place and the metadata that you've captured. And I cannot say this enough, just as important as data standards are to the analytics that you will get downstream of a campaign, all the data that you're able to capture right now, that is going to become fuel for the AI models that you run. And it's the old adage of garbage data in, garbage data out. So again, this is why data standards become so vital at the campaign level and the content level, because this is going to fuel the future of your analytics practices, the decisions you make, and it's going to have a material impact on your bottom line. So to wrap up, before we go to Q&A, 4 key takeaways. Mark mentioned this at the onset, but commit and drive global alignment. I can't stress this enough. Get all the stakeholders at the table. Invite your agency partners, your systems integrators, your consultants, your internal teams, anybody that should have a voice around your data standards to drive that global alignment, and use some of the processes and systems that are already in place and the business units that already have taxonomy in place. Invest in a source of truth. Too often we see massive organizations using, frankly, a spreadsheet or a shared document to manage taxonomy and data standards. Invest in a system, a source of truth, so every constituent that needs to touch data standards, whether or not they even know it's happening, they can go to a place to find those standards. I'll let Mark touch on the last 2, and then we'll flip to Q&A.
Thanks. Certainly, as I mentioned over and over again, don't try to revolutionize this in one shot. You'll never be successful. There are just too many pieces. And also, seamless measurement takes planning. You're not going to get to, oh, it sounds like a super simple question, but if you didn't realize that question was going to be asked when you started the process, you're really never going to be able to answer the question when you're done with the process. So understanding that whole big picture and getting everybody in the room to have a conversation about it is certainly the way to go.
Great.
Thank you both for the presentation today. That wraps it up for the content that we had planned, but we did have a few questions in the chat. Actually asked a couple of times. Mark, you mentioned it, but can you explain to us what was the #1 thing that you did to get everyone on board and to agree to data standards?
In the media process, everybody uses some form of taxonomy. And really, the first thing we did was to take everybody's individual taxonomy and move it into Claravine. So instead of using a random Excel spreadsheet or a Google Doc or a Google Sheet, we took those standard, the way they were doing it with no changes, and moved it into Claravine, which got the muscle memory of, okay, this is where I go to get my name. Now, first of all, it made sure at that point everybody was at least using the same app, which then allowed us to say, okay, let me look at all these different versions. How do I coalesce a single global view of this? Can I coalesce a single global view of this? And that really, I think, was, and in fact, we probably didn't make a change in terms of any of our taxonomy standards or definitions, maybe for 6 months after we had launched. It was just getting that whole, if everybody gets the metaphor, that wax on, wax off of this is where I need to get my naming from, was, I think, the way that we really got rolling.
Super helpful. Thank you. Another question. At a organizational level, trying to get all of the top people bought into this, how did you facilitate this as a priority project?
Stubbornness. A lot of this was, I think that as a company, everybody can acknowledge the value of having globally automated reporting, but not realizing the level of effort it takes to get everybody to approach it the same way and to know where all of the breakages might happen. And if we treat it as it's somebody else's role or it's somebody else's responsibility to do it, then I don't think that'll get done. So it ended up to be that the team who was tasked with managing the global reporting tool became, by default, the team that ended up owning the global taxonomy. I think that was because there was no way to do the global reporting otherwise. And again, I want to give a tremendous amount of credit to our WPP partners who came to the table with Claravine and came to the table with the acknowledgement that this is a process that we all have to work together, and put the energy and team in place to, to deliver this at the scale of managing our media a nickel at a time. So, as much as things don't happen at an agency unless a client is willing to drive it, I do think that they deserve a tremendous amount of credit for putting their shoulder behind it.
Absolutely. As they say, teamwork to make the dream work, but this is at like a global, large scale. And so, Mark, we appreciate you taking the time to present with us at Adobe Summit and here today as well. EJ, is there any final comments you'd like to add before we wrap up for the day?
No, I just thank you to Mark, and I'll piggyback on something he said. One of the reasons I think they were so successful, and as we followed them on this journey, is they chose a very non-invasive path right out of the gate, and they didn't try to disrupt everything globally. They fit this into their process, and the proof is in the success that they've seen. So a big thank you to Mark, a big thank you to the Colgate team, and to all the partners that have been involved. This has been an amazing ride.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we've got for you today. Like I said, we will be sending out this recording, and this story will be available on our website. So check back soon. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.